A sharp gasp echoed through the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Crystal wine glasses froze halfway to people's lips. More than 300 eyes turned toward the heavy mahogany doors as they slowly swung open. Clara Vance stumbled inside. Her white silk gown was soaked in dark rain and smeared with mud. Blood stained her bare forearms. She was missing one shoe. She looked less like a noble bride celebrating her 5th anniversary and more like a survivor of a car crash. Her husband, Horus Winfield, shot to his feet at the head table. Flashbulbs from news cameras exploded in white light. Horus did not run to her. He pulled a silver microphone toward his lips, looked straight into the flashing cameras, and spoke with a voice cold enough to freeze the room. "Have you finished humiliating my family, Clara?" To understand how a dedicated emergency room nurse ended up standing in rags before Chicago's high society, we must look back 6 hours before the lights in that ballroom went out. The morning began under the blinding fluorescent tubes of the Chicago General Hospital emergency room. For 14 straight hours, Clara Vance lived in a world of sirens, antiseptic smells, and rushing gurneys. Her feet burned inside her medical clogs. Yet, her hands remained steady as she wrapped bandages and checked for lines. As an ER nurse, Clara was invisible by choice. She held the hands of scared children and cleaned blood off shattered bones. But in her marriage to Horus Winfield, her invisibility was a sentence. When her shift ended at 5 p.m., Clara rushed to the hospital locker room. Tonight was her 5th wedding anniversary and the annual gala for the Winfield Real Estate Group. Horus had spent 3 months reminding her how critical this night was to impress his lead investor, Richard Ashcombe, and his daughter, Celeste. Clara pulled her cream silk gown from its bag. She applied lipstick in the foggy mirror, trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She had worked 48 hours this week, managed all bills, cooked every meal, and washed Horus's silk shirts by hand. He never said thank you. She stepped out into heavy rain. Traffic on the Kennedy Expressway was at a complete standstill. Clara checked her watch nervously. 6:30 p.m. The party started at 7 p.m. She pulled her sedan onto a dark back road to bypass the traffic. The rain poured in violent sheets. Wind whipped heavy oak branches across the asphalt. Suddenly, her headlights caught a jagged shape in the ditch. An old pickup truck was wrapped around a telephone pole. Smoke curled from beneath the hood. Clara slammed on her brakes, skidding on wet leaves. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped straight into freezing mud. Inside the cab sat an elderly woman. Blood trickled down her forehead into her silver hair. Her breathing was shallow, wet, and rattling. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Clara shouted over the wind. She pulled open the jammed door with all her strength. The sharp metal edge sliced her lace sleeve and scratched her arm. Clara felt no pain. Her brain switched instantly from tired wife to trained responder. She checked the woman's pulse. It was rapid and weak. Her airway was obstructed. Clara cleared the woman's throat with her fingers, tilted her head back to open the airway, and wrapped her own heavy coat around the freezing woman. A black SUV rolled down the back road. Clara waved her arms frantically. "Stop. Call 911. The tinted window rolled down 2 inches. A man in a tuxedo looked out, frowned at the mud splattering his paint, and pulled the window back up. The SUV drove away. 2 more luxury cars passed without stopping. Clara knelt in the mud for 40 minutes, holding the old woman's head still to protect her spine until ambulance sirens broke through the storm. She would have suffocated in 10 minutes if you hadn't held her airway, the paramedics said. You saved her. Clara looked down at herself. Her dress was ruined. Her right shoe was gone. Her watch read 8:15 p.m. She was over an hour late. When Clara reached the Drake Hotel, she ran through the lobby, hoping to clean her face in private. Instead, the doors of the ballroom swung open. Clara stepped into the blinding light, and the world froze. Horus stood behind the podium beside Celeste Ashcombe. To his left sat Clara's father, Dr. Albert Vance, chief of surgery. Horus walked down the stage stairs. His blue eyes held pure disgust. "Horus!" Clara gasped. "An old woman. Her truck crashed. She was dying. I had to hold her airway." Horus sneered into his microphone. "An old woman? You look like a street beggar. You keep 300 people waiting. And this is the story you invent." Gossip rippled through the room. Clara turned to her father. "Father, please. You are a doctor. You know I couldn't leave her." Dr. Albert Vance stood up. Public shame was the only thing he feared. "Enough, Clara. Tonight, you dragged our family name through the gutter to feed your unstable need for attention." He pulled the antique emerald signet ring off her finger. "From this moment on, you are no longer my daughter." Horus stepped forward, took Clara's diamond wedding band from her hand, and dropped it into his pocket. "You belong out there in the mud," he whispered. "Don't come back to the penthouse." Nobody defended her. Clara turned and walked out into the silent hallway. From the shadows, Alfred, the family driver, stepped out with tears in his eyes. He pressed a leather purse and a wool coat into Clara's hands. "A door may close in a palace. Miss Clara," Alfred whispered. "Take this. Get on the bus to the coast." Clara embraced the old driver, her tears washing paths through the mud on her cheeks. She walked out into the freezing night. She had lost everything in 20 minutes. But as she boarded the bus heading toward the coastal town of Oak Ridge, Clara Vance did not cry again. A quiet, dangerous flame began to burn inside her. The rhythmic hum of the bus engine vibrated through Clara's boots as the dark highway gave way to misty coastal pines. When the bus hissed to a stop at Oak Ridge, a small town wrapped in salt air and fog, the sun was just peeking over the Atlantic. Standing beside the wooden bench was Mrs. Maeve Sterling. She wore a faded wool cardigan, her silver hair tied in a loose bun, her dark eyes filled with gentle warmth. Maeve did not ask about the torn gown or the missing shoe. She simply wrapped a knitted shawl around Clara's shoulders and led her up a winding gravel path toward a weathered oak cottage. The smell of dried lavender, firewood, and old paper filled the cottage. For a woman who had lived in a cold marble penthouse in Chicago, this house felt like a different universe. Soft morning light filtered through lace curtains, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. "This is your home for as long as you need," Maeve said softly, setting a cast-iron kettle onto the black wood stove. Living in Maeve's world required work that Clara had never known. In her marriage to Horus, servants cleaned the granite countertops, and catering services delivered gourmet meals. Here, water came from a brass pump, and warmth required fire. On her second morning, Clara attempted to light the wood stove. She struck 2 pieces of flint together over dry pine needles. Sparks flew, but no flame caught. On her 5th try, a cloud of black soot erupted into her face, coating her nose and cheeks. Clara sneezed, staring at her reflection in the copper kettle. She looked ridiculous. "The stove doesn't care about your nursing degree, dear," Maeve chuckled from the doorway. "It only respects patience." Cooking proved equally challenging. When Clara tried to prepare breakfast, she squeezed an egg too hard, shattering the shell into the cast-iron skillet. When she tried to knead bread dough, flour exploded across the wooden table, dusting her hair white. By noon, the kitchen smelled like burnt crust and wood smoke. Clara stood over a lumpy, blackened loaf of bread, feeling tears prick her eyes. Every great baker burns their first 10 loaves, Maeve said gently, scraping the charred crust with a butter knife. In this house, mistakes are just ingredients for learning. Later that afternoon, a loud clatter erupted from the front yard. Clara ran to the window. A tall young man in dusty denim overalls and heavy boots was sprinting wildly around the stone well. Behind him, a massive white goose flapped its wings furiously, honking like a broken trumpet. "Get away from me, Gertrude. I came to fix the roof, not to duel," the man yelled, ducking behind a wooden wheelbarrow. The goose charged again, nipping at his boot heels. The man scrambled frantically onto an empty cart, raising a rusted hammer in surrender. "I yield. The yard belongs to you." Clara burst into laughter. It was not a polite smile meant for Chicago dinner parties. It was a deep laugh that washed the tightness from her throat. It was the first genuine laugh she had shared in 5 years. The man looked toward the window, catching her eye. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty sleeve, exposing a warm, lopsided smile. "I see my humiliation brings you joy," he called out cheerfully. "I'm Arthur, the local handyman who is currently terrified of poultry." "I'm Clara," she replied, stepping out onto the porch. Arthur jumped down from the cart, brushing wood shavings from his jeans. Up close, his gray eyes were bright and intelligent. His hands were calloused from hard labor, but his movements were remarkably gentle as he helped Maeve lift heavy cedar shingles onto the porch. Over the next few days, Arthur became a constant presence. He repaired Maeve's sagging porch step, fixed a broken window latch, and cleared fallen branches without asking for a single dollar. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and violet, Maeve pulled a fresh loaf of rye bread from the oven. She cut the loaf into 4 small portions. Clara frowned slightly. "There are only 3 of us for dinner." Maeve smiled, wrapping 2 slices in clean linen napkins. "Mrs. Ellis lost her husband last winter, and her knees are stiff. Mr. Cooper has been coughing all week. A full stomach feeds the body, Clara, but a shared meal feeds the soul." Clara carried the bread baskets through the village herself. She walked along dirt paths lined with wild roses, delivering food to elderly neighbors. She saw genuine gratitude in their eyes, a warmth no fancy charity gala in Chicago had ever shown her. For the first time, Clara belonged to a community that asked for nothing except kindness. Generosity was not measured by wealthy titles or diamond rings. It was measured by open hands. That night, the cottage grew quiet. The wind whistled softly through the pines outside. Clara sat at the small pine desk in her bedroom. The moonlight spilled across her hands. She opened her leather-bound medical notebook, the one she had saved from her locker at Chicago General. She stared at her handwriting on the yellowed pages. For days, she had felt like a victim of Horus's cruelty and her father's cold rejection. She picked up a pen. Her fingers stopped trembling. "Tears will not rebuild my life," she whispered into the quiet room. "And waiting for an apology from a coward will only keep me trapped." Clara pulled out an official application form for the Nurse Practitioner Advanced Certification Program. She filled out her name, her license number, and her clinical hours in clear, bold black ink. She was done hiding in the shadows. She took full responsibility for her own future. Clara sealed the envelope, set her pen down, and looked out the window at the dark Atlantic Ocean. A calm, unstoppable resolve settled inside her chest. Months turned into a steady rhythm of hard work, discipline, and self-renewal. Clara's days in Oak Ridge began long before sunrise. She studied late into the night, thick textbooks on advanced pharmacology and clinical diagnosis covering her small pine desk. Every morning at dawn, She jogged along the rocky shoreline, feeling the cool ocean mist wake her senses and strengthen her lungs. She managed her small savings with disciplined precision, investing in fresh professional attire, nourishing meals, and a sharp, tailored navy coat. Her skin regained its healthy glow, and her eyes, once dull with exhaustion, grew bright, clear, and confident. Clara converted an abandoned wooden shed near the harbor into a mobile community clinic. She scrubbed the cedar floors, painted the walls clean white, and stocked the shelves with donated medical supplies and fresh bandages. Arthur worked tirelessly beside her every afternoon. He replaced rotting floorboards, installed bright LED lighting overhead, and built sturdy wooden cabinets for her equipment. As they worked, Arthur watched Clara in quiet admiration. He saw the sharp, decisive focus in her eyes as she diagnosed an elderly fisherman's respiratory infection or gently dressed a crying child's scraped knee. "You move with the precision of a surgeon and listen with the patience of a mother," Arthur said one afternoon, wiping cedar sawdust from his forehead. "Nursing isn't just administering medicine, Arthur," Clara replied, adjusting the stethoscope around her neck. "It's noticing where a person hurts before they even find the words to ask for help." As they organized the clinic's inventory, Clara noticed a disturbing pattern among the local prescription boxes. Many low-income families in Oak Ridge were receiving expired, counterfeit antibiotics delivered by a regional medical distributor. The pills smelled faintly of damp chemical filler and crumbled into chalky dust when touched. "These aren't real antibiotics," Clara said, her brow furrowing as she examined a capsule under the bright desk lamp. "Someone is filling cheap gelatin shells with industrial chalk and selling them to vulnerable rural clinics." Arthur's gray eyes darkened instantly. He picked up one of the plastic bottles, carefully noting the distributor's batch code stamped on the label. "I know people who can track where these shipments originate," he said, his tone turning crisp and authoritative. Together, they began documenting every batch number, logging receipts, and gathering physical samples inside a locked metal drawer. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Chicago, Horus Winfield's carefully crafted world was collapsing. His life with Celeste Ashcombe had devolved into a public nightmare of humiliation. She criticized his clothes before executive dinners, mocked his business ideas in front of investors, and treated him like an errand boy at a high society charity gala. When Horus stumbled over his words during a formal toast, Celeste laughed openly in front of the reporters, placed her engagement ring on the bar table, and walked out. Worse still, Winfield Group was drowning in operational chaos. Horus had always claimed credit for his company's flawless logistics, but the truth was now exposed to the entire board. For 5 years, Clara had secretly managed his schedules, edited his financial reports, prepared his board presentations, and smoothed over his client conflicts. Without her silent, meticulous labor, Horus missed critical filing deadlines, lost major accounts, and faced mounting corporate debt. Driven by desperate regret and bruised pride, Horus drove his sports car to Oak Ridge. He expected to find Clara living in bitter misery, eager to beg for his forgiveness. Instead, he found her standing outside the bright community clinic. She wore a crisp navy coat, her golden hair catching the afternoon sunlight. She was surrounded by smiling villagers, healthy children, and fresh flower baskets. She looked more radiant and self-assured than she ever had in his cold marble penthouse. Horus stepped out of his car, his polished leather shoes crunching on the gravel. "Clara," he called out, his voice laced with forced warmth. Clara turned around calmly. Her expression remained completely unbothered. "I've come to bring you home," Horus said, taking a step toward her. "I realized Celeste meant nothing to me. The company needs you. I need you. I'm willing to forgive your mistake from that night and let you come back." Clara stared at him. She looked at the man who had once made her feel small, invisible, and worthless. She felt no anger. She felt no lingering pain. She felt only a profound, liberating pity. "You didn't drive 300 miles because you miss me, Horus," Clara said, her voice steady and echoing across the quiet courtyard. "You came because your company is falling apart, and you finally realized you used me as your unpaid manager for 5 years. Clara, don't be ungrateful." Horus snapped, his pride flaring. "I gave you a life in high society." "No," Clara replied softly, stepping closer and looking straight into his eyes without flinching. "You gave me a cage. I used to think I couldn't survive without your approval. But I realized something the moment I stepped onto that bus." She smiled, a serene, powerful smile that made Horus take an involuntary step back. "I don't need your forgiveness, Horus," she said quietly, "because I no longer need you to exist." She turned her back on him and walked into her clinic, closing the solid oak door firmly behind her. Outside, Horus stood alone on the dirt road, staring at the closed door, finally realizing that the quiet woman he had discarded was gone forever. Late autumn brought biting Atlantic winds and heavy gray rain to Oak Ridge. The air inside, Mrs. Maeve Sterling's oak cottage, smelled of dry eucalyptus, hot herbal tea, and old pine needles. But on a freezing Tuesday midnight, the peaceful quiet was shattered by a sharp, terrible gasp echoing from the bedroom. Clara rushed down the hallway, her medical instincts igniting instantly. Maeve lay propped against her pillows, clutching her left chest with pale, trembling hands. Her skin was ashen, slick with cold sweat, and her lips were turning a faint, alarming blue. "Maeve, stay with me," Clara shouted, her voice firm, steady, and authoritative. She checked Maeve's carotid pulse. It was rapid, weak, and dangerously irregular. Maeve was suffering an acute myocardial infarction. Clara called emergency services, then administered oxygen and aspirin from her medical bag. As ambulance sirens wailed through the rainy night, Maeve reached out, pressing a small velvet pouch into Clara's hands. Inside rested a heavy, antique gold badge, polished to a mirror shine. It bore the engraved crest of the Pendleton Global Health Foundation and a personal signature dated 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I pulled an injured driver from a burning car on the interstate, Maeve whispered, her chest heaving behind the oxygen mask. His name was Thomas Pendleton. He gave me this badge, a promise of royal debt, any request granted without question. Take it, Clara. Use it when the shadow falls. At the hospital emergency bay, Arthur met the ambulance. His face went pale as he watched Maeve being wheeled into the resuscitation room. When Clara showed him the gold badge, Arthur's gray eyes filled with deep, silent emotion. "Thomas Pendleton was my father," Arthur said softly, his fingers tracing the engraved gold crest. "My father searched for the woman who saved his life for 30 years. She vanished into the night without taking a single dollar." Arthur looked at Clara, his jaw tightening with fierce resolve. The distributor codes Clara had documented from the counterfeit antibiotics matched the shipping manifests of Winfield Group. Horace Winfield was profiting from fake, chalk-filled medicine distributed to vulnerable rural clinics across the state to cover his corporate debts. "The National Healthcare Gala is in Chicago this Friday," Arthur said, his voice turning crisp, sharp, and commanding. "Horace is seeking a $10 million grant from my family's foundation to save his bankrupt firm. It is time to end his charade." Arthur departed for Chicago that night to coordinate with federal prosecutors, secure financial records, and prepare the legal trap. Meanwhile, a silent, agonizing storm was brewing in the heart of Dr. Albert Vance. Driven by a restless, gnawing guilt he could no longer suppress, the chief of surgery drove his sedan to Oak Ridge in secret. He parked beneath a line of tall pine trees overlooking Clara's community clinic, staying hidden in the rainy shadows. Through his binoculars, Albert watched his daughter. He saw her kneeling beside a frightened young boy who was choking on a plastic button. With calm, practiced precision, Clara performed the pediatric Heimlich maneuver. The button popped onto the wooden floor. The child gasped, inhaled fresh air, and his crying mother threw her arms around Clara in overwhelming gratitude. Albert lowered his binoculars. His chest tightened with a suffocating, painful ache. He had spent his entire career measuring human worth by hospital board seats, expensive tuxedos, and wealthy corporate connections. Yet, standing in this humble coastal town, his discarded daughter possessed a quiet dignity and genuine respect that all his money could never buy. Late that night, Albert returned to his silent, lonely mansion in Chicago. He walked into Clara's untouched childhood bedroom. On her bedside table sat a faded birthday card she had drawn for him when she was 6 years old. In childish crayon, it read, "To the best doctor in the world. I will always make you proud." Albert sat on the edge of her mattress and wept bitterly into his hands. He realized he had not protected his family's honor that night at the Drake Hotel. He had destroyed the only precious thing he owned. Back in Oak Ridge, the storm clouds parted, revealing a dark, star-filled sky over the Atlantic Ocean. Clara stood at the end of the wooden harbor pier, the freezing wind whipping her navy coat around her legs. She held Maeve's gold badge tight in her palm. The polished metal reflected the cold, brilliant light of the moon. 6 months ago, she would have cowered in fear at the thought of facing her father and Horus again. She would have wept over their betrayal and begged for their warmth. Now, she felt no fear. She felt no lingering bitterness or resentment. She was no longer a helpless victim waiting for permission to exist. She was a skilled practitioner, a protector of her community, and a woman in complete control of her own destiny. Clara closed her fingers tightly around the gold badge. She looked out at the vast, roaring Atlantic Ocean, her eyes burning with quiet, unstoppable determination. She was ready to step into the light and demand justice. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton shimmers under 3 massive crystal chandeliers. Soft jazz plays through hidden speakers. The air smells of expensive perfume, aged scotch, and roasted prime rib. More than 500 executives, chief surgeons, and city officials fill the room in black tuxedos and silk evening gowns. At the center table sits Horus Winfield. His dark tuxedo is brand new, his hair slicked back with scented pomade. He adjusts his cufflinks, a smug smile resting on his lips. Beside him, bank notices and foreclosure warnings pile up in his briefcase. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, the Pendleton Global Health Foundation will announce the recipient of its $10 million medical innovation grant. Horus is certain the check belongs to him. To the future of Winfield Group, Horus whispers, raising his champagne flute toward his remaining board members. The lights dim across the hall. The chatter dies down to a soft hush. A single spotlight hits the main stage. The master of ceremonies steps to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor true dedication to human life. To present the Pendleton Global Legacy Award, please welcome Mrs. Maeve Sterling. Gasping ripples through the front rows. Walking slowly across the hardwood stage is an elderly woman in a simple, elegant navy dress. Her silver hair is pinned back neatly. In her right hand, she holds a heavy velvet box. Her dark eyes sweep across the sea of wealthy faces with quiet, unyielding authority. 30 years ago, Maeve's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, clear and steady. A young man pulled an injured driver from a burning car on Interstate 90. The driver was Thomas Pendleton. Before he was taken to the hospital, he gave that young man a gold badge, a pledge that the Pendleton family would honor any request for justice, anytime, anywhere. Maeve opens the velvet box, lifting the heavy gold badge into the spotlight. The polished gold flashes like sunlight across the darkened room. "Tonight, I use that pledge," Maeve declares, her voice rising with power. "Not for money, not for land, but to demand justice for a woman who was publicly humiliated in this very city." Murmurs erupt across the tables. Horus frowns, his glass pausing halfway to his lips. Maeve points toward the rear entrance of the ballroom. 6 months ago, a dedicated ER nurse stopped beside a rain-soaked back road. She found an old woman dying inside a wrecked truck. She knelt in freezing mud for 40 minutes, slicing her hands on sharp metal, holding that woman's airway open until the paramedics arrived. She saved that woman's life. The double doors at the back of the hall swing open. Clara Vance steps into the room. She wears a tailored emerald green gown. Her golden hair rests softly on her shoulders. Her skin glows with health. She walks down the center aisle with a straight back and calm, majestic grace. Every camera lens turns toward her. Flashbulbs explode like white lightning. That night, when she arrived at her wedding anniversary gala covered in mud, Maeve continues, her tone cutting through the room like a blade. Her husband did not ask if she was hurt. He called her a beggar into his microphone. Her father stripped the family ring from her hand. They threw her into the storm because she chose mercy over pride. Horus's face turns pale as chalk. Sweat breaks out along his hairline. "That dying old woman in the mud was me," Maeve says softly into the microphone. "And the woman who saved my life stands before you." The entire ballroom erupts into shocked whispers. Reporters furiously type on their tablets. Camera crews zoom in on Horus's trembling face. "And now," Maeve smiles, looking toward the side curtain, "I hand this stage over to the man who carries Thomas Pendleton's legacy." A tall man steps out from the shadows into the center spotlight. He wears a flawless black tuxedo. His posture is regal, his jaw set like iron. Horus gasps, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the carpet. "Arthur." "Good evening, Horus," Arthur says into the microphone, his voice deep, resonant, and icy cold. Arthur turns to the audience. "For 6 months, I lived in the coastal town of Oak Ridge under a false name. I worked with my hands. I repaired roofs. I cleared the brush. And I watched how medicine was delivered to the poor." Arthur raises a thick leather binder. "While working alongside nurse Clara Vance at her community clinic, we discovered a dark crime. Expired counterfeit antibiotics filled with industrial chalk were being distributed to low-income clinics across 3 counties. Images flash onto the massive projector screens behind the stage. Lab reports, shipping manifests, customs receipts, and bank transfer records. At the top of every document sits the corporate stamp of Winfield Group. Horus Winfield stripped his company of funds to pay for luxury cars and publicity," Arthur declares, his eyes locking onto Horus. "When bankruptcy threatened him, he knowingly purchased fake pharmaceuticals from illegal offshore suppliers to maximize profit margins. He poisoned the sick to buy his tuxedos." The heavy oak doors at the side of the ballroom burst open. 4 federal agents in navy windbreakers walk briskly down the aisle. Horus Winfield, the lead agent, announces, his voice booming over the speakers. "You are under arrest for federal health fraud, corporate embezzlement, and reckless endangerment of human life." Steel handcuffs click loudly in the silent room. The sound reverberates through the speakers. Agents pull Horus from his chair. His face is slick with sweat, his eyes wide with terror. "This is a mistake. Clara, tell them. Father, help me." Horus screams as agents drag him backward toward the exit. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. As the commotion dies down, Dr. Albert Vance slowly steps out from the head table. The chief of surgery looks broken. His expensive tuxedo hangs loosely on his shoulders. Tears stream down his weathered cheeks. Before 500 of his medical colleagues, before every television camera in Chicago, the proud doctor walks toward his daughter. Albert drops heavily onto both knees on the carpet before Clara. "Clara!" Albert sobs, his voice cracking with unbearable grief. "I protected my name, and I destroyed my own child. I judged your blood-stained dress, but I was the one whose soul was filthy. I don't deserve your grace. But please, forgive your foolish father." The ballroom holds its breath. Clara looks down at her kneeling father. She feels no satisfaction in his ruin. She feels no desire to hurt him. She reaches down, gently taking his trembling hands, and helps him stand up. "I forgave you long ago, Father," Clara says softly, her voice filled with quiet strength, "because I will never let your past choices rule my future." Albert buries his face in his hands, weeping openly. Arthur steps down from the stage and walks slowly toward Clara. The crowd parts for him in complete silence. He stops 2 feet away from her. His gray eyes are soft, burning with pure devotion. Arthur reaches into his inner coat pocket and pulls out a small velvet box. He opens it. Inside rests a simple platinum band, polished and elegant, holding a clear, brilliant stone that catches the crystal light. Arthur kneels on one knee before Clara. "Clara Vance," Arthur says, his voice echoing softly across the silent hall. "I did not fall in love with a doctor's daughter or a wealthy heiress. I fell in love with the woman who stopped beside a dark road when everyone else drove past. I fell in love with the woman who mended broken hearts with her own hands." He looks up into her eyes. "Will you do me the honor of building a life with me? Will you marry me?" Tears of pure, unbridled joy spill down Clara's cheeks, washing away every ghost of her past. A radiant, breathtaking smile spreads across her face. "Yes, Arthur," Clara whispers, her voice carrying through the room. "Yes." Arthur slides the ring on her finger and stands up, pulling her into a warm, powerful embrace. The entire ballroom explodes into thunderous, standing applause. Cheers ring out from every table. Flash bulbs ignite in a sea of white light. Standing in the center of the world, wrapped in the arms of the man who saw her true soul, Clara Vance closes her eyes. The pain of the past dissolves completely, replaced by victory, freedom, and love. 6 months after the National Healthcare Gala in Chicago, peace returned to the coastal town of Oak Ridge. Spring arrived with a rush of warm sea breezes, green pine needles, and wild yellow daffodils blooming along the rocky cliffs. The salty ocean air smelled of damp earth, crushed mint, and fresh apple blossoms. Dr. Albert Vance did not return to his surgical suite at Chicago General Hospital. He resigned from his position as chief of surgery, sold his marble mansion, and transferred his entire life savings into a public trust fund. With those funds, he built the Oak Ridge Community Emergency Center, a bright, red brick clinic equipped with modern diagnostic tools, clean hospital beds, and free medicine for anyone in need. Every morning before the clinic doors opened, the former chief of surgery woke at dawn. He wore plain flannel shirts, canvas trousers, and comfortable leather boots instead of tailored Italian suits. He carried heavy boxes of medical gauze, scrubbed the linoleum floors, and personally ladled hot vegetable soup for elderly patients waiting in the lobby. There were no news cameras, no medical journals, and no formal titles. He asked for no praise. He served with quiet, humble dedication. One bright May afternoon, as Albert handed a fresh bandage to a young fisherman, Clara stepped into the clinic hallway. She wore a crisp white medical coat over a simple linen dress, her golden hair catching the warm sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Albert looked up from his work. He set his clipboard down on the counter, his hands trembling as he stared at his daughter. His eyes filled with soft, clear tears. He did not call her Nurse Vance, nor did he use his old formal voice. "Father," Clara whispered, her voice warm, gentle, and forgiving. Albert buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with emotion. The daughter he thought he had lost forever in that Chicago ballroom had finally come home. He reached out and held her in a tight, silent embrace, wiping his tears on his flannel sleeve. The following weekend, Clara and Arthur were married in the green meadow behind Mrs. Maeve Sterling's oak cottage. There were no velvet carpets, no press photographers, and no security guards. Long oak tables overflowed with fresh rye bread, wild berry jams, roasted summer vegetables, and glass pitchers of cold apple cider. Soft fiddle music floated through the warm afternoon air. Local fishermen sat beside retired nurses, laughing and clinking glass jars of sweet cider. Dr. Albert Vance proudly walked his daughter down the grassy aisle between rows of wooden chairs. He walked not as a powerful hospital executive, but as a grateful father given a second chance at life. When Arthur and Clara exchanged their wedding vows under a canopy of white birch branches, Maeve's notorious white goose, Gertrude, waddled straight into the center aisle. The bird snatched a warm buttered roll directly off the head chef's silver platter and squawked loudly. Arthur sprinted 2 steps backward, ducking behind the wooden podium as Gertrude flapped her wings furiously. The entire crowd collapsed into fits of helpless laughter. Even Albert laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks. As the sun began its slow descent toward the Atlantic horizon, the wedding music softened into a gentle, rhythmic melody. Guests gathered around glowing paper lanterns suspended from the oak branches. Clara walked up the grassy hill overlooking the ocean pier. The evening sky flared into brilliant shades of amber, gold, and deep rose, the golden hour. The cool sea wind lifted the hem of her white dress, whispering through the tall grass around her feet. Arthur stepped up beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist. Together, they looked down at the vibrant village below. They watched Albert sharing bread with laughing children. They saw Maeve sitting on her porch in a rocking chair, a quiet, peaceful smile on her face. Clara looked down at the simple platinum band on her finger, sparkling in the warm golden light. She remembered the wet mud on County Road 9. She remembered the cold rain outside the Drake Hotel, the bitter words of her ex-husband, and the dark bus ride to Oak Ridge. She felt no lingering anger toward Horus. She felt no bitterness toward her past struggles. Clara had stopped waiting for someone else to save her long ago. She had stopped playing the victim and stopped blaming others for her pain. She had taken full responsibility for her own happiness. She had built her own medical knowledge, earned her advanced credentials, managed her finances, and reclaimed her dignity through decisive action. A deep, serene peace filled her chest. Standing on the sunlit cliff, wrapped in the arms of the man who cherished her true heart, Clara Vance smiled. She was completely free, fiercely proud, and ready for every sunrise yet to come. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.